Hey guys, Brad here from Scooter Street. Look, we've got another addition to our little video series we're doing on our shop zip. This is just a totally factory Piaggio zip that we're doing some tuning to. So today's fun day. We're going to be putting this Molossi MHR Replica cylinder kit on this zip. Now, if you've been following the series, you would have known that we recently put a Molossi Wild Line exhaust on this scooter. So if you're an avid scooter tuner, you'd probably recognize that Molossi Wild Line exhaust, a very, very basic performance exhaust, and a Molossi MHR Replica cylinder kit, which is, I'd say, a high-end street kit, one step below a mid-race kit. It's not the best combination. Now, it's actually good to demonstrate what we're going to be doing in the next video in this series. So I'm going to put this MHR Replica kit on this scooter, and then in our next video, in the series of the build on this bike, we've actually got a 𝐂𝐡𝐞𝐤 𝐎𝐻 coming for this bike as well. Now, 𝐂𝐡𝐞𝐤 𝐎𝐻 is such a good match with the MHR Replica. It's a 𝐂𝐡𝐞𝐤 𝐎𝐻 is sort of a high-end street performance exhaust, and it's such a beautiful match with the MHR Replica from our experience. But we're actually going to, in the next video, demonstrate how the bike performs with the MHR Replica cylinder kit with the Wild Line on it, and then we're going to put the 𝐂𝐡𝐤 𝐻𝐻 on there. We're going to jet it up a little bit more for that exhaust, and probably have to do some transmission tuning, but we're going to be able to show you what's the difference in performance with a 70 kit between a Molossi Wild Line exhaust and a 𝐂𝐡𝐤 𝐻𝐻. Now, this is going to be able to demonstrate a point that I've made many times, which is one of the core components of an engine build is having the cylinder kit and the exhaust match. They must match. This is one of the most key things with trying to build a high performance street scooter, is getting the cylinder kit and the exhaust to match. And so that in that next video, it's going to be a really great way of showing you the difference that a high-end performance exhaust compared to a low-end performance exhaust actually makes. But for today's video, we're just going to be installing this MHR Replica cylinder kit. Now, we've done other cylinder kit installs on this channel before many times. We've never done one on an MHR Replica. Now, really, there's not a lot of difference. MHR Replica is still a twin ring piston. It's actually the same piston as the standard cast iron 926 kit, which is just the Molossi cast iron 70cc cylinder kit. The only difference you might notice if you've ever bought a piston for one or the other is that it is a different piston kit part number. The difference is because the MHR Replica has a 𝐂𝐡𝐴𝐻 bore, it uses different rings to the factory cast iron bore. Slightly softer is my understanding, so it doesn't damage the 𝐂𝐡𝐴𝐻, and the rings don't get bound up on the 𝐂𝐡𝐴𝐻 because it's a much harder metal. But other than that, pretty much the cylinder kit install is almost exactly the same as a standard cast iron kit. Just obviously with that 9-port port map configuration, it's just a much higher performing cylinder kit. And obviously being aluminium, it's a lot lighter weight and better at heat diffusion than cast iron. If you follow the channel for any amount of time, you'd know that we are a huge fan of the MHR replicas, and really for not a lot of extra money compared to a cast iron kit, they produce so much more torque and much better performance, and have a much wider capability than just a standard cast iron kit. So we're going to get into it. I'm going to chuck this the shop zip up on the bench, and we're going to rip this factory cylinder kit out of it, and yeah, probably look at assembling our 70 kit first, and then we're going to show you how to install it on this scooter, which obviously Piaggio Hyper 2 engine. It's going to be pretty much the same for any Hyper 2 engine, anything under that Piaggio umbrella. But even if you don't have a Piaggio, two-stroke cylinder kits are pretty much all the same. There's really not a lot of difference, particularly as it pertains to installation. So hopefully you get something out of this, no matter what kind of scooter you have. Same as last time, I'm going to strip a lot more off this bike than is actually necessary to do a cylinder kit, mainly because if I don't, it's going to make it really hard for you to see on camera what I'm actually doing. So usually if you're doing this at home with the zip, you can usually get pretty good access to the cylinder if you just remove this spark plug panel. It's really just held on by, I think, like 2 or 3 screws. I'm going to pull a fair bit more off so you can actually see on camera what I'm doing. I've got most of our panels off. Now, one thing I just mentioned that's really specific just to the zip, if you ever pull your zip down this far, a really good thing to check is the fuel sensor. This is the fuel level sensor. Now, these stereotypically leak all the time on the zips. If I had $1 for every leaking fuel sensor I send on a zip, I'd be able to afford 50 zips. And they probably all have fuel leaks at the sensor. You can see actually this one, so that black glue, it's already been replaced and sealed up. You can see some marks where it's previously leaked, because honestly, almost every single zip, certainly everyone that I've ever seen, at some point develops a leak just here. It's just one of those common issues on the zip. Now, similarly, they also very commonly develop leaks at the oil sensor on the top of the oil tank as well. Now, this isn't just a zip issue. It's actually almost every Piaggio, again, that I've ever experienced. Certainly the SRMT, the Sport City, probably the SR50 is the only one that I've seen not really have a lot of issues with oil leaks, but they very typically leak around this seal. So you see this one here, that grey glue, that's like a gasket glue, and the cable ties there, obviously holding it on while the gasket glue dried, but that's already had a repair on the oil sensor. So just a couple of things to look out for, particularly on Piaggios, but specifically the zip, because are very, very common issues. We're pretty well stripped apart anyway. So look, on the air-cooled Piaggio engines, obviously you have your coil slash CDI over here. Obviously on the Piaggios, it's a combined unit, coil and CDI all in the one. And our forced air cover as well, we're going to pull that off because it actually locks into the front of the cylinder shroud, the air shroud for the cylinder. I'm going to pop both of those off. We're going to get that shroud off, and we can pretty well get really good access to our cylinder after that. Obviously no head gasket to worry about with these factory Piaggio cylinder kits. That's a bit easier. Okay, factory cylinder off, and obviously going to get that circlip and pop the piston out now. Now what you can do is use the flywheel to rotate the piston until it's at top dead center, make it nice and easy to get to. Now the other key thing is very, very important, stuff a rag just around the tops of the intake ports here on the crank before you take the circlip out. Now what this is going to do, it's going to prevent or certainly drastically reduce the likelihood of that circlip. That they're quite springy. If it does happen to spring out and fly off, which happens quite commonly, it's not going to go into the crankcase, because if that thing springs out and it goes in the crankcase, you are stuffed basically until you get that out, and it's often very, very difficult to get it out even with a little magnet. If it's sprung in there and locked itself around something or got into it in a tricky little spot, you're quite possibly, well, you're definitely risking having to split the whole crankcase to get one stupid little 50-cent circlip out of the crankcase. So really important. Stuff a rag down there. It's just going to make your life a lot easier if something goes wrong. Look, one thing that's really important that I've not mentioned before, when you're working on your scooter, you want to be like Lego Batman. You only work in black and really dark shades of grey. Because I promise you, you're going to get dirty. If you're wearing a lovely white shirt, you're going to ruin it. All right. So there's a couple different ways you can get circlips out. This one here is an E-type circlip. So I could get it out quite easily with a set of pliers, but I'm going to use this flat blade here for now. Now, obviously, we're not going to be reusing this piston, so I'm not being as gentle as I could be. But if you were reusing the piston, you're going to be really gentle. There we go. Okay. Now that our circlip is out, pull our rag out of the way. And I'm just going to push the gudgeon pin through. using a flat blade screwdriver. Now, we did a piston rebuild on this one a few weeks ago, so it's still really nice and oiled up, so it come out quite easily. Sometimes they can be a little bit dry, particularly if it's an older piston, and they can need a fair bit of encouragement to get that gudgeon pin out. Just be patient with it. Now, I mentioned that the Piaggios don't have a head gasket, but they do, however, have a base gasket. These, on the air-cooled ones, it's all aluminium, single-use base gasket. So make sure you get that off, because if you don't, and you put your cylinder kit, your 𝐂𝐡𝐤 70 kit on top of it, you're going to stuff up the squish. It's going to be not enough compression because it won't be enough squish. Okie dokie, so we've got our factory cylinder out. Now time to start assembling our MHR Replica cylinder kit. So, get this open. Beautiful quality. Alright, obviously got our cylinder here. Piston's usually inside it. There it is, and usually 𝐂𝐿𝐴 will put the rings in the bottom of the cylinder kit. Now they asked us to use the piston to push them out. There we go, there's our 2 rings, our piston, and I also got our beautiful, maybe you can see it there hopefully, you can see the 9-port, where can you see? It's hard to see, but you've got a 9-port there. The record's its 9-port name, so it has its main sort of exhaust port there, then it has 2 little extra ports either side, which obviously just increases the ability of the cylinder to exhaust, which means the intakes can be bigger, so more air and fuel in, more exhaust out, more power. Exactly the same head as the cast iron kit, just a nice aluminium head. Got our studs. Great thing with these kits, these 𝐂𝐿𝐴 kits, is pretty much all the Piaggio ones at least come with a 𝐂𝐿𝐴 small end bearing. Our gasket kit here, so paper for the bottom. It's good, it can be pulled off and reused a few times. And obviously the O-ring head gasket, which is great because you can obviously pull the head off lots and lots of times without having to replace that O-ring. Eventually it'll flatten, but that's going to take quite a long time to happen. And obviously gudgeon pin in our 2 circlips in the bag with that. Quite a nice complete kit. Really good, like for a lot of customers who are doing 70 kits, we find a lot of them maybe have a factory cylinder, maybe they've got 10 or 15,000 Ks on it. It's an old tired factory cylinder, and you're spending a couple $100 doing a rebuild anyway. So if you're already in there doing a rebuild, why not increase it and put a 70 kit in there? And basically it's like getting a whole new engine pretty much, except for the bottom end, but it's a whole new top end. So it's basically a brand new engine for really not a lot more money and then a lot more performance. So just be careful you don't lose those circlips. Now, 𝐂𝐿𝐴 do give half of it's in Italian, and the translation isn't fantastic, but it is a half decent instruction little booklet in here. Now, really, there's not tons of super important information in here. If you're doing a more complicated kit like a MHR Racing, it's very, very important that you read this, because the MHR Racing kit, the squish is very, very important that it be set to a particular squish. So any kit that comes with a bunch of different base gaskets, have a really good detailed read through the booklet, because if it comes with a varying set of base gaskets, there's always a reason, and that reason is that the cylinder is designed particularly with the port timing, which I'm not going to go into, but this basically is where the cylinder sits in relation to the crankcase, so where the piston's getting to and at what point in the cylinder. It's very important you have a read through there, because if you get that wrong, you put too thick or too thin of a base gasket in there, you can blow the engine
or alternatively, you can be missing out on a lot of performance that you would get if you had the correct squish. Now the squish rating, just quickly, is basically when the cylinder's all together, so we've got a head on here, the squish is how far up the piston is coming. So basically, if you were to put something in there against the head, how closely is that piston squishing it against the head, basically. So this is more or less your compression, but on a high-end cylinder kit, it's very important that it have the correct squish. So, and we're talking in such fine margins with those racing kits, it's like, you know, you're supposed to set it to 0.7 of 1 mil. You know, and this kit here, from our experience squish testing MHR reps, they're usually somewhere between 1 and 1.5 mil squish. So yeah, obviously with those racing kits, it's very, very important that you get the correct squish. This isn't a racing kit, but I just thought it was an interesting thing I might mention. So what I'm going to do, as we usually do with these kits before we put them in, make it nice and easy. We're going to assemble the piston. We're going to sit the piston in the cylinder so it's ready to go. And one important part about that is to make sure you get the arrow facing the exhaust port. That's what the arrow is for. Main reason being this window needs to be in the correct position. And also the ring pins. And this is where the ring ends sit. There you go, they sit there. Okay, they need to be in a position where they're not going to be interfering with the ports. So the way they put the cylinder is designed, the little bridge between a couple of those intake ports is exactly where this ring end sits. That way it's always has cylinder covering it. Now if you put the ring in the wrong way and that ring end is sitting in one of those ports, what actually can happen is it can pop out a little bit and it can break the ring. Basically it can smash the ring, which I've seen people do before, put the piston in the wrong way, and it can actually break the rings because it gets caught inside one of those ports. Very important that you put it on the right way. So I'm just going to carefully stretch the ring around. I'm going to use this gently. There we go. Now the main thing with this, you shouldn't have to force anything. If you're forcing it, something's not right. So just be gentle, because it is quite easy to break rings if you're not gentle when you put them in. Now the next step is we're going to put one of the circlips in, so we only have to worry about putting one of the circlips in when it's in the really inconvenient tight space of inside the engine there. So normally what we do is whichever side is more easily accessed when it's in the bike, that's the side circlip that we want to put in when it's in the bike, obviously. So the more difficult side, we're going to put that circlip in now. Now with the Piaggios, generally speaking, it's far easier. You've got more access on the exhaust side. So we're going to put the Variator side circlip in now, so we don't have to when it's in the bike. So obviously, the bike's pointing forward that way, the cylinder's sitting like this, the piston's sitting with the arrow down, so it's this side that we need to put the circlip in. Okay, so I'm going to get this circlip, obviously, Variator side. Now, there's a few different ways you can do these. Now these pistons from factory have a little slot here, and the idea of that slot is to try and make it easier to get the ring in. Now the most important thing with this is that you don't bend or damage the ring when you're putting it in. So I'm just going to use a flat blade screwdriver, very gently. You can use a pick, you can use lots of different things, just whatever you think is going to be easier. It's just popped out. That's just being gentle. If you start getting frustrated with it and you start losing your temper, you're definitely going to damage it. So you just need to take your time. If you're starting to get frustrated, walk away, have a drink of water, come back, because you only really get one good shot at this. If you're a bit too rough, you bend the ring, then unless you've got some spares at home, you're going to be waiting for a couple of weeks while a new one comes. It's going to be very frustrating. Making this look hard right now. Okay. So I just heard it, there we go. Nice little click as it pops in. Now, hopefully you can see where that's sitting. Now, usually, I don't want, you got two ring ends. I don't want a ring end sitting in that slot. Just same sort of thought process of why you don't want the ring ends sitting over a port. I don't want that sitting over that slot because it's just going to encourage it to want to pop out. Now, one other thing that I will usually do, just get the flat blade and gently just push around to make sure that it is definitely seated. I'm very, very confident that it is. Sometimes it can look like it's seated, but it's actually just slightly sitting out on one side, and you've got to take the bike for a ride and boom, dead cylinder. So there we go, I've definitely put the right side in. So when we get the piston in the bike, all we're going to be doing is putting the gudgeon pin in and then putting the exhaust side circlip in. Much easier. Now the other thing that's really crucial and important is that you oil the piston in the cylinder when you're setting it all up. So I've got this bottle of oil here. Sometimes I might just get like a little bottle lid or something like that, put the oil in that to stop exactly what just happened from happening. But I don't have one on me right now, so I'm just gonna put a tiny bit of oil around the piston. Come on. There we go. Whoa, that's too much. That's okay, I can wipe it off. That'll be enough for everything here. So we want to get in the rings, just generally around the piston. That's way too much, which is why I usually use a bottle cap. We're going to put it on the inside of the cylinder as well. Get some more off this soaking piston. Alright, generally spread it around. You just want everything to be lightly oiled. That's all you want. You want nothing that's dry. Right, I'm going to get a rag. Remove some of the excess here, because there is a lot. It's not like a big deal, but if you have tons and tons of oil on there, the first spark plug's just basically going to be a throwaway because it's just going to foul it instantly. All right, next we're going to line both the rings up with the ring pins. So there's one ring pin, and there's the other. Okay, so just going to squeeze them so they're sitting in there nicely. Now we're going to insert it into the cylinder. So same thing, the arrow must go towards the exhaust port. So I'm going to sit it at the bottom. I'm going to gently wiggle it. So something's not right, so I'm going to readjust. Again, it's about being gentle. If you're having to use a lot of force, it's probably something wrong. There we go, it sits in nicely. Arrows on the exhaust port, everything's happy. Okay, so obviously when we're ready to put it in the bike, I'm going to sit the piston sort of half out like that. Now I don't want the rings coming out of here, because it can essentially they can bind up and get stuck, and we end up with the same issue that I just had the first time I tried to put the piston in. So we're going to sit it there like that, sort of as far out as it can come without the rings slipping out of the bottom of the cylinder skirt. So I've got nice access to that gudgeon. Last thing we need to do to get the cylinder ready is put the exhaust studs in. So one little trick, these are actually the head nuts. One little trick you can do to get these in. Chuck one on there. What we don't want to do is get a nut stuck on the unthreaded part. So what we're going to do, chuck two nuts. So one nut's on backwards, one's on forwards. What we're going to do is get a spanner here, trusty 10mm, and we're going to tighten them against each other. Whoops. Not crazy tight, but just enough that they're now pretty tightly on there, because they're tightened against each other, so neither of them wants to move. I'm going to gently... Now do not put oil in these threads. It's one place that there definitely doesn't need to be oil. So just to the point that it's... Yep, that's firm, that's not coming off. And then we do the exact reverse to get the nuts back off. Easy as that. Now we'll do the other side. Again, because this is an aluminium cylinder, I want to be really careful we don't strip these threads, because they are soft. Because obviously aluminium is not quite as strong as cast iron. So there we go, going to put that in there. And same thing again, just going to gently tighten that up. And that's pretty firm, not going anywhere. Now, if you did have a higher end racing exhaust that has a quick release header, this is the time that you'd put that on, obviously, instead of the studs. And you could probably even, if you had some bolts that were the correct length, put some shorter bolts in there, but it's just up to you. Obviously, you don't want to put bolts in there that are too long and that are going to go through and damage the cylinder. But yeah, so our cylinder's all ready to go. The only other thing we need to do is get the head ready. So I'm going to get all that foam off there from the inside of the packaging. I'm going to do the same thing again. It's probably even enough just there. Don't need a crazy amount, just enough that we can spread around, maybe a tiny bit more. There we go. That's a good amount. Now mainly we want this for the O-ring, so as soon as we put that in you can see a lot of it squeezes out and we can spread it around the O-ring. Don't want to put that in super dry. Now another function of the oil here is it actually stops the O-ring from falling out. So kind of stuck in there now by the oil, which is good because we don't want that falling out and sitting out of place when we go to put the head on. So now that we've done all of that, the one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the small end bearing. Again, I've put way too much on. That's okay. Just wipe off the excess. Because those little needle bearings, you don't want them to be dry. Okay, first things first, very, very important. We do not forget to put our base gasket on. So because this is paper, you just want to be careful you don't rip it. So just be gentle with it. Set it on. Yep. Now if you've had like an old paper gasket from a different kit that you've used previously, sometimes they do get stuck on the cylinder, on the crank casing. Just make sure if that's the case that you do remove it. Right, chuck our little end bearing in. Okay, so cylinder time. So maybe one of my favourite parts of an engine build, sliding the new cylinder on. Just going to make sure that we get our our con rod up in there and get the small end bearing sitting in a good spot. Okay, so that's all sitting in there nice. I'm going to go get the gudgeon pin. We're going to slide that in, obviously, from the exhaust side, and then we're going to have a look at our circlip. First things first, we need to get the gudgeon pin in. So I've got a long screwdriver here. I found if you sit the screwdriver through, it makes it really easy to hold the piston and the con rod in the right position to get the gudgeon pin through. Now I didn't mention this before, but obviously it goes without saying almost that obviously you need to put some two-stroke oil on the gudgeon pin as well, which I have done. So yeah, again, it's another one of those patience things. Just be a little bit patient. Don't want to damage anything. Just try and line it up as best as you can. Usually get it in. There we go. Give it a bit of a wiggle and it'll usually go through. There we go. Alright, actually I want to get it all the way through, which it is. Let's give it a little check. Okay. Now, I'm going to do the same thing that we did before. I'm going to put a rag around the intake ports. Really super duper. I do not want the circlip flying into the cylinder. That would be very bad. Just going to try and pack it in such a way that it's not going to make it even more difficult than it's already going to be to get the circlip in. Try not to block the view of the camera too much, but it's probably going to happen regardless. Okay. There we go. Right, now what I described before, where the circlip doesn't quite sit all the way in, that's exactly what's happening here. Really good example. This is why, at the end, I'll push on it to make sure that it's really, really nicely seated in there. So as soon as you hear that nice, definite click sound, you know that it's definitely in. But regardless, I'm going to give it a little bit of a push around just to make sure. I'm very, very confident that's in. And as I mentioned as well, you can see the end of the ring here is well away from this little cutout here. So there's zero chance of it slipping out. And because we were gentle with it and we didn't bend it, it's going to have a really nice, clean and reliable seat there. So, anything left to do now? There we go. Alright, head time. Now one thing I will usually do at this stage is hold the cylinder and turn the flywheel just to make sure everything's working well, nothing's binding up. That looks and feels really good. So I think we're doing pretty good. Alright. So, grab our head now. Now these are obviously, they are bigger on one side, so just make sure it matches the cylinder. That looks like it's right. Yep.
So again, remembering, mentioned this when we did the video on changing the piston, but 2 of the head studs are longer and 2 are shorter. Now the longer ones, they have a thread in the top, and the idea of these is they have some thread for the bolt to go through for the cylinder shroud. So I'm going to make sure, obviously it's the bottom left and the top right. So I'm going to make sure I put my short studs on the opposite bolts to that. Otherwise I'm going to have to pull it all back down again, which is annoying. Now do not tighten anything at this stage. We want to get all the bolts on there. Sorry, those studs that I just grabbed before to show you were actually the exhaust studs. These ones here are for the cylinder. They just look very similar, but you can tell these ones because they have the thread all the way to the top for the air shroud to go into. So same thing, we're just going to get them a little bit firm. Now you can really easily over tighten these bolts and cause yourself a big problem. So what we're going to do, you're going to use a cross pattern, always, same as you do with so like the wheel nuts on your car, so you keep the pressure even. Now these don't need to be crazy tight, they just need to be firm. So I'm just going to work my way around. You can use a torque wrench for this. I believe that the Molossi manual for the cylinder actually has a torque spec rating listed. If not, the Piaggio workshop manual definitely does. It's probably going to be somewhere in the realm of about 25 Newton meters or something like that. But I've done this enough times that if you, realistically, if you're sensible, you should be fine. So I'm using a quarter drive ratchet, I'm not using a big 3/8 or something as well. So the bigger the ratchet that you use, the more leverage you're going to have, and more chance you're going to over tighten one of these. I'm just going through, gently tightening it all. That feels pretty good to me now. That feels nice and firm. That's good. That one's good. That one's good. All right, pretty happy with that. Same thing, rotate by the flywheel again. Nothing's hitting, nothing's binding, so I think we've done a good job of that. So I'm going to go and chuck all the panels back on. If it were you doing this at home, I'd probably recommend that you chuck a spark plug in there and start it, just to make sure that it's working. I've done this enough times, I'm quite certain that it will start pretty easily. So I'm going to go ahead and chuck all the panels back on, and then we'll catch back up once everything's all back together, and we'll give it its first start. Okay, so all the panels are back on, ready for our first start. Now it's normal when you do a cylinder rebuild, whether it's a cylinder rebuild or you replace a cylinder, even if you change something in the carburetor, it will often take a couple of starts to get it to run properly, and that's probably going to be the case, but we're going to find out in a second. Now obviously the next part of this video would be to tune the bike. We haven't changed the jet for the 70 kit, which obviously is pretty important. But if you want to see that, you're going to have to wait for the next video, because we're obviously going to have to jet the bike up according to the exhaust that we put on there. And we're going to have a couple of different exhausts we're going to test to be able to show you the difference in performance increase that you get with a very basic performance exhaust opposed to a more advanced, higher performance exhaust that's going to be much more suited to like a high-end street level cylinder kit, such as the MHR Replica in this scooter. Thanks for watching, guys. Look, we really appreciate your support. Hopefully there was some useful information in there for you, and we'll get back to you with the follow-up video with the exhausts in a couple of weeks. But again, thanks for watching, guys. We appreciate your support. And as usual, any questions, please let us know in the comments.